Got a 70s Fender Vibrosonic reverb, and it has the front panel flap that these 70s ones are prone to, because there are only a few nuts holding it in place. The master volume is not one of them, as you can tell by that movement, and the jewel doesn't clamp onto the front of it like it did on the earlier ones. So let me fix this. Well, as you can see, the speed pot, these screws for the bright switch, these screws for the other bright switch, and these input jacks are the things that hold the panel in place. They cheaped out and did not use a washer large enough, or they cheaped out just to make it faster to build. They cut the hole larger than on the 60s ones. That's why you get this flap. This thing was in a cabinet that was not original to the amp, and it had been built just barely too small, and so that happened when it was removed. But when you remove this, the speed and these screws and those input jacks, pull this panel off, and let's fix that. All right, this may be one of the least sexy things I've ever put on a video, but I've got the panel off, and I've manually straightened this a bit, and then I'll clamp it in a little bit and get that really straight. But first, there's a little bend here. I'll also clamp out. There's some sticky here. They used an adhesive in some spots, but almost none down here where there was no hardware connection. And I want to get that old adhesive off while I do some other stuff. So I'm gonna put this Goo Gone on and let it dissolve the old adhesive. Let it sit for a while I start to work on the cathode bypass caps in the amp. And then after a while, all this old adhesive residue will come off, leave us with bare metal. And then I can clamp it straight again. And I've got some new adhesive to make it less likely to happen again in the future. There's a little bit on the front panel I'll get off as well. Same principle. Just let the Goo Gone do its work. And it smells like oranges, so you know that's nice. Let that sit. All right, we've got new cathode bypass caps in place. This one originally was unbypassed with just a 470 ohm half-watt resistor, which loves to roast itself. It's the cathode driver of the 12AU7 in these 70s Fenders. Change that to the Blackface Black Panel era 2.2K with the 22 microfarad. The correct 4.7 microfarad here. The bypass cap for the tremolo stage was mounted over here, one of this RCA jack. It's actually usually quieter in operation, mounted here where it was in the 60s, so that's where it is. Fender, when they went to the 330Ks on the grid leaks here in the phase inverter input rather than the 1 megs, changed the input coupling cap from 1 nanofarad to 10 nanofarad. So they decreased the resistor value by 1/3, but they multiplied the cap value by 10, which results in these amps having way too much low end compared to the more desirable 60s versions. The fix is to replace that 10 nanofarad with a 3.3 nanofarad. So you reduce the value of these resistors by 1/3, you triple the value of this cap, and you end up in the same place as far as low frequency response. Bias caps changed out. On this amp, I'm not redoing the grounding to chassis due to budgetary reasons. I will see, this has the bias balance. I will see where that ends up being. If necessary, I will replace this resistor with a trim pot, which will give us both bias balance and bias level. Let's see how the front plate's doing. All right, fresh out of the press. Lays flat all the way around, doesn't have that divot over here, doesn't have that bend over here. So I will give this some fresh adhesive and put all the screws in place and the nuts. And hopefully that won't ever flap up again. At least it won't do it for decades, which is about all I can do. All back in place. Let that tape sit while the adhesive really sets up another 15 minutes or so. Once it comes off, it'll be rock solid. I can clean the front panel a bit before the knobs go on. I'm just going to let that sit for a while I look at the filter caps. You can see them beginning to bubble, so it's time for these to go. You've seen me change these a lot, so I'm not going to show the whole process here. I'll just show you the after. That's much better. Next, I'm going to take that tape off the front panel, see how the front panel is doing. And then we'll look at the bias and the power cables. But first, I need to get a cup of coffee. That's better. It doesn't have to look brand new. Just get a bunch of the old dirt off and the bins out. Leave the bins to my record collection. I'll put the knobs back on. The power was already wired correctly as far as the hot going to the fuse and the power switch, and the neutral just going straight to the primary. I just had to remove the polarity death cap just because those like to fail. So I'm about ready to put tubes in and power it up and check the bias and see if there are any other issues. All right, it's all back together. And let's see, the things I had to change. I had to get some DC out of this node right here and this node right here, which I've discussed in lots of previous Fender videos. They just get a little bit of leakage in the board. I just heated up those eyelets real well, drove that moisture out. I already discussed the change to the phase inverter input cap. The bias pot had a 15K resistor, which set the bias level. And with that resistor, the two output tubes were idling at 10%, which is just staggeringly cold. I temped in a 6.8K, which puts him at 54%. I'm going to replace that with a 10K trim pot in series with a 4.7K resistor, which will give me a good range to adjust for different output tubes. The amp is sounding overall pretty well. I had to change out the 10K audio taper pot for the mids on this channel. The old one was noisy and cleaning did nothing for it, and it was really noisy. The other pots cleaned up just fine. The output tubes it came with, sadly, are garbage now. They just don't work. So I've got two of my test pairs in, which close enough to match quad for our purposes here for me to determine the amp is healthy. I will talk to the owner about options for getting 6L6s. I've got my ear to the ground on a couple of sources, some of which I'll divulge on this channel, some of which I need to keep to myself for right now, but I'll share with paid clients. But let's hear it after all that work is done. So here's the normal channel, and that buzz is because I'm sitting with the pickups a foot away from the transformer. So I'll try to move back a little bit as I play. There you go, guys, an authentic lick. The bass pot after set 69 gets a little bit all instant on. So if you're coming to a post 69 amp from playing a 66, don't be afraid to turn the bass down. And conversely, if you have a 76 and you play a 66, don't be afraid to turn the bass up. Bright cap works. That all sounds right. Let's try the vibrato channel, the reverb channel. Sounds very Fendery. Sounds like it's right there where it ought to be now. Same caveat on the bass pot. Not much nicer now that the mids pot work. And again, that hum and buzz is just because I'm having to be close to the transformers. Part of it's that my extension cable for my lav mic died, so I have to be close to the phone. Otherwise, I'd be sitting a little bit farther back, and this thing would sound a lot better without that hum and buzz. And I could just unplug the mic and walk away, but then you can hear my lovely voice. And we don't want that, do we? So here's the vibrato. Not the slowest. That can be the drift in these caps here, but it's working. Sorry about hitting that B flat on that G. Let's check the master volume. You know, it's a funny thing about these Fenders. This early master volume that they introduced on these earlier 70s amps, you can't quite see it, can you, when we move them? This simple little master volume sounds really good on these amps and works really well. So what did Fender do? They changed it. They did a push-pull boost thing, which is a terrible, terrible sounding circuit, but the master volume part is quite nice. All right, so I think all I've got to do is break the bad news to the owner about the output tubes and put in the new bias adjustable trim pot. That'll give us bias level as well as bias balance, which is a nice place to be. The amp, other than that, sounds great. It should be reliable for decades to come. This is a 72, 73, I guess it's a 73 based on the transformers. Later in 73, they started waxing the hell out of the board, and this one is before that, so this is a good one to have. And I think that pretty much does it. I also got to make sure that the reverb tank that the amp came with is working, but the guy who owns the amp teaches electronics, so if he needs to change a reverb tank, that's RCA cables. I think he's a little overqualified to do that. I don't have to do everything on his dime.